All right. So, again, welcome. As we kind of get started here, um, if you haven't ever looked at your instructional planning report, I do want to make sure that we kind of talk about that, and then also some of the great things that the report itself can actually provide for you. So we're going to go ahead and get started by just looking at some of the things that I'd like to accomplish today. And again, if you've got other thoughts that you'd like to add in, by all means, feel free to ask any questions. You are again welcome to use the microphone. So if you want to go up to the top, you can try to, get your microphone connected on your computer. But again, feel free to use the chat box. And we are going to assume that you've had some knowledge with the AP Insight program. So as we start to talk about, some of the challenge areas and where you would find things, hopefully that will be pretty easy for you to follow along. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to kind of talk you through some of those pieces that, not everybody really looks at on the instructional planning report. So feel free to just go ahead and dive in. And if we need to pause because you've got great questions, by all means, please do. So we're going to be sitting down and just looking at that instructional planning report, as well as looking to see what kinds of things you can adjust as a teacher. So hopefully today you're going to be able to just look at your own instructional planning report and figure out things that you can do with the AP Insight program that will sort of help you instruct your students, as well as provide yourself with, resources that might be useful. And then also, give you some areas where you can talk to each other that you might want to, share with how things are going. All right, so our first question for today, and really the question that's going to try to drive us, is how are we going to use the AP Insight program to actually look at information from the instructional planning report and then to respond to all of that various information. So we're going to start out by, taking a look at, one, the instructional planning report, and then we're going to look at just the mock IPR, that's the instructional planning report, to get an idea of ways that you could look at it. Once we've gotten that through, then I want to kind of give you a chance to get your own instructional planning report in case you haven't gotten one, and then look to see some of the things that you might want to do as well. Okay? All right. So over in the chat box, what I'd like you to do is just tell me a little bit about how your progress is going so far with respect to the IPR. Like, are you using it, or are you not exactly sure what it is? So over in the chat box, just pick a letter. It doesn't matter which letter you pick, but it'll kind of help direct the focus. All right, so great. I see you guys are all finding the chat box just fine. Let me see. Angela, it looks like this whole session should be recorded and will be up on the AP Insight website. But you also have access down below there to the reading materials. You do have access to the PowerPoint as a whole as well. And great, I see some of you are you're getting the gist of how IPR is, but you're not exactly sure what to do with it, and that's okay. So we've got some B's and some C's, and that's just fine. And Lynn, it seems like you're just starting, so let's see how that's going. Maria, if you've got any advice for everybody, by all means, do let us know. All right, so we're going to just kind of start out with where you find the report itself. And if you've gotten access to College Board and you know where to find just AP Central, like how do you actually figure out your AP it, your login credentials, all of those sorts of things, that's where you're going to go to find the instructional planning report. So this is where you'd also find the students' scores after the students have taken the exam. And then below that, you would be able to then see your IPRs. And so those are where you're going to find them. Those two spots right there. Now, if you've got more than one class, you'll see that it is divided by section, or you can just look at it as a whole for the teacher. And then once you download it, it's going to basically look like this. So in this area, right, you're going to see a couple of pages. This first page is going to show you how your students did compared to the global. So you can see there's a little color coding up at the top, right? The dark blue is you and your students, and the green area is going to be how the students did globally. So you can see, right, we've got a little bit of a bell curve going on here for pretty much everybody. And then on the bottom sections, you're going to see that you have multiple choice and how, again, your students did in blue versus the global. And then you also have the free response, and you can see how your students did versus the global. Yeah, Todd, I agree. Like, I don't know that I always spend a lot of time looking at my IPR either. But what's great about the IPR is that you really have an opportunity to just kind of judge how you feel you're doing as a teacher. Like, are you actually assisting your students and really comprehending the material? And keep in mind, like, the student is going to get their score. That's going to tell them how they're doing, but this is going to tell you how you're doing. And Maria's pointing out that their vice principal actually like starts like with it, just as a meeting, and that's an interesting idea. So I mean, I'd love to hear how that kind of goes. I know our department leader, she hands them to us, but then as far as a building goes, we don't really do anything else with it within our school. So I like to then, for me, I like to turn to the second page, because on the second page, what you'll see is there's actually scores for your students with respect to all of the different big ideas, and then with respect to the science practices, and then down on the bottom portion, you'll see with respect to the free response sections. So you get your multiple choice on the upper section, how your kids were doing over here, and then you get your free response and how your kids were doing for each of those different questions. And so that's kind of nice as well, so that you can kind of narrow it down. And Ron, that's really interesting as well. Like, I'd be interested again to see kind of what they have you looking at within your school, so that, I mean, feel free to share over there in the chat box about how you guys are using it, because that would be really great information, especially for some of the people who haven't really spent a lot of time with the IPR. All right, so here we're going to look at just some of the sections a little bit closer. And what you'll see here is that we have the division of your students, and this would be on, the pages, showing you how they're doing within each of the areas. So you can see it's divided into 5, and you've got then the lower section. You've got score 3, which would be if those students are performing proficiently. And then you've got the upper section of them being above proficient. So you can kind of see you've got some different areas there as well. Now, if you've kept all of your previous IPRs, you'd then be able to sort of make comparisons for yourself, right? And see if you as a teacher are in fact improving. And these global scores really are, Todd, they are going to in fact be for all the students who have then taken that particular exam, so that you can really just make a great comparison for yourself versus the rest of the nation, and even some of those schools that are taking it internationally. All right. So, let me move my arrow over there. So you would want to, as a teacher, right, you would want to sit down and just spend a little bit of time looking at your data and then figuring out what that really means for you. So that's what we're going to do, is we're going to take a look at, again, a mock IPR, figure out where the teacher was having maybe some areas that they'd like to improve on, maybe some areas that they want to sort of celebrate, which, you should do as well, because sometimes you did something really well that all your students picked up on. So you want to be focusing on just content area, right? How many questions were they asking? What was your group's mean versus the global mean? And then really, like, where were your students doing a really great job and where were your students having some struggles? That's going to let you then make some decisions about, what you want to do next time. And so what kinds of activities did you do? What kinds of things might you want to change? All right. So let's just check, right? If you're looking at your group and you're looking at the global mean, um, the means might be the same, right? Or you might want to see if your students were evenly distributed. Maybe on the upside, your students were all on that upper end. So those are going to be some questions that you want to be, again, asking yourself. I like to focus on the subsections myself because I like to see how they were doing on specific questions or specific content areas. So I might look at that as well. And then I have the opportunity to work with another colleague as I teach my AP class. And so we might sit down and actually discuss, like, what kind of strategies did we do that were working really well? What kind of strategies were specific to multiple choice versus the free response to help improve some of the things that the students are doing and some of the things that they're able to show us. All right. So we're going to look at a mock IPR, and at any point, I want you to, ask questions about what we're going to see. So this is going to be, basically a fake teacher. And we're going to look at some of the teacher's data and sort of decide, like, where could this teacher make some improvements? Now, I would absolutely recommend that you guys not try to change everything, especially for those of you who have only been doing this for like 1 or 2 years. Look for one thing that you really think you could help the students improve on, and then just try to fix that during that next year. So it gives you a really nice idea of, just areas in which you can, start looking at changes. All right. So at this point, this is the teacher's instructional planning report. And again, it's kind of small, so if you are not able to see it, but you did download the mock IPR down below, it'll be a little bit easier for you to see. Again, this is that second page. So the top part is going to be the multiple choice. And I like the top part because it gives me a nice general idea how kids are doing. The bottom part, I'm not going to necessarily see the multiple choice again, but the bottom questions are always released. So I would be able to see how they're doing there. For this teacher, you can see that they have some issues in Big Idea 5, which is thermodynamics. So again, if you can kind of look in there, they're struggling a little, right? They don't have too many people in the upper area. It's almost equal to the number of students who are in the lower area. So that might be one area that maybe they'd like to look at. And then science practices are really, really important with respect to how those things are going in laboratories especially. So you would see that as well. And if you look in this column, you can see that thermodynamics was quite heavy in terms of how many questions the students were being asked, right? There were 21 of those. Wait, am I reading that correctly? Is that 21? No, that was 11. You can see, though, that for this teacher, right, you also had some areas, big idea 2. There were 12 of those, right? So that helps you as well. If you then go and you look at science practice number 2, you can see that that was quite heavy, and a lot of the science practices are overlapping in the multiple choice as well. Okay? Then you also see, right, that this teacher had some issues here, or really just some questionable areas that maybe they'd like to look at with respect to that first question. And I point this one out because if you notice, question number 1 had some thermochemistry in it. So if you were looking at your multiple choice and then comparing it to your free response, you might say, man, I really kind of want to look at that question a little bit more closely. The other one that they had some other questions with were question number 2. And that one had to deal with, some of it was the bicarbonate and the acid. For those of you who haven't looked at the test, there were some struggles there as well. And so you can see that they had some students, right, not doing as well in the upper portion. Excuse me. So that would then give you some ideas as to what you might be able to look at. So then if you were sitting down and you were trying to decide, like, okay, what should I actually do then? You would want to look to see, right, were the students performing better on the multiple choice questions? And maybe why were they performing better on the multiple choice questions? So was it because of some of the things that you had done in class? Or instead, was it because of, maybe some of the activities that the students were doing, or maybe just the way that the questions were worded? If, on the other hand, you saw some areas where the students were doing like really well, again, what kinds of things might you have been doing in class that you really were proud of, that you wanted to make sure that you repeated that? So those would be some things that you'd want to start to look at. All right. So like I said, I would not sit down and create a plan that identified like a number of things that you should be changing. So looking at that teacher's report, it kind of points out like there are some certain areas that maybe this teacher might be able to work on. So I would say, if I were that teacher, I would try to focus on just 1 or 2 even of those areas that I'd like to improve on. Now, you would see, right, the student performance Q&A is something that the leaders put together after all of the scoring has been taken care of. So if you've gone to like a conference, you might see what's called the chief reader do a presentation about things that were common student errors. They're very similar to some of the things that are posted on the College Board site after the questions have been uploaded, and you can then see the answer keys. You'll also see some commentaries about how the students did. They're very similar to that, only a little bit more, I guess you might say, like pertinent to including multiple choice questions as well. So what were some of the common errors that the students did? Now, if you are looking at your information, right, and how things are going, you might even want to ask yourself if there's anything that you could quickly fix for the year. So if I were looking at my IPR, and then I started to look at that first question, which, remember, sort of overlapped that big idea with thermodynamics, I would really start to just dive into the question a little and take a look at some of the things that the students were being asked to do. Now, question 1 was certainly not the largest struggle on the test this past year by any stretch of the imagination. But again, it's a nice spot using the IPR to say, yes, this was one area that my own students, right, according to the mock IPR, might have had. So as you look at this question, you're going to see, again, there's the thermo to start out with. You can see then the students are just going to start out with a little bit of calorimetry and then a little bit of molar heat calculation. Then they're going to switch gears just a little bit to look at what's going on with the heat of solution and how it's related to the ionic radii. So as they're looking at the ionic radii, right, they start off with some real simple questions. So how was the electron configuration, right? Why would one be bigger than the other? And then they start to actually be asked to talk about lattice enthalpy and then talk about what would be the different pieces of the crystal if they were actually looking at the lithium chloride. And so all of that is using the size of the different atoms and sort of pulling it together in a different way so that you're talking really periodic properties, but also a little bit of thermochemistry at the same time. And then it finishes off with this last question where they start talking about what kinds of things are happening with the dissolution process in terms of the particle-particle interactions, the ion-dipole interactions, and that sort of thing. Now, on the mock IPR, you saw that the students really scored pretty well on this class, but we still had a number of those students that were falling in the lower half, so the lower 2/4 of the entirety of the class. Now this is, again, a way to sort of check how things were going for your own students. So now this is actually the rubric that was used to score the exam. And so you might kind of look at it, and I know for myself, sometimes I look at the rubric and I think, oh yeah, my kids could totally do that. But if I saw in the IPR that they were having some struggles with the thermodynamics section, then it might be true that they were also having some struggles in this area as well, where they're calculating with calorimetry. And I find that a lot of times, because I am also an AP reader, that sometimes the students are actually not having an issue with the concept of energy, but sometimes just the units that the energy is in. So this part, II here, of part A, is sometimes where the students are having the most difficulties. So if I'm noticing that that's a flaw for myself in the IPR, like things that I would like to improve on, things that I want to make sure that I'm offering to my students and providing them with activities, then I also know that that's going to relate to the challenge area, which is with respect to the Big Idea 5, and going along with that representation of, representing and modeling energy. So I could pull that up and take another look and be able to look at those activities for the students. And again, remember those challenge areas are going to have on performance tasks as well. So that might be a great way of just double checking. Okay, now also in this question, remember there were questions about electron configurations. And so that too, right, if you thought to yourself, well, I'd really like to just double check on how they're doing there, you might instead go with the challenge area on evaluating scientific models for atomic structure. So Todd, let me go back and answer that question. Todd's asking, right, if part I, part I, they actually needed units. And it does say that they need units there as part of their answer. So if they were not including units correctly and then carried down whatever their answer was to part II, you can see that in part II, it was asking for kilojoules per mole. So there were a number of students this past year who had issues because they mislabeled part I and then carried it down to part II. And so that ended up being one of the problems that the students had, which is as a teacher, you know, you believe your students maybe can do that until they actually take, you know, a high risk test and find out, nope, they forgot. So again, it's just a nice way of double checking. All right, so here was part C, and again with part C, it's again going with the whole concept of energy levels, what's occurring there, and again, that also aligns to the challenge area on atomic structure. So if I were looking at these students, this past IPR class, I might kind of focus on just these two areas. Or maybe I feel like I didn't do a great job on lattice energy. And so maybe I would instead look at the challenge area on connecting intermolecular forces and physical properties. So you have some options, right? As you're kind of going through and looking at the questions and thinking to yourself, I've just looked at the IPR. What areas do I want to improve on? And you can see in this question here, this one is quite impressive because it really connects to a number of different areas that are part of the challenge areas of AP Insight. And then going again along with intermolecular forces and physical properties, you see again, right, that's part of this first question. So there was a lot tied into this first question. And the great thing about the first question was that a lot of the students tried it. Like they felt like it was an approachable question. So if you then look at the IPR, keep in mind that those first three questions now are going to be the long questions on the new exam. And not only that, but they're going to hit a number of different big ideas as well as a number of those challenge areas. So I know when I'm now looking at the IPR, I really focus on those first three questions because I know that those are going to be giving me some very specific and important data. At the same time, you also then know that those last questions on the free response will be the shorts. And so if you notice that a student is, that a group of students is struggling on the short questions, that's really going to give you a very specific area that maybe you could work on, because those are going to be typically only one big idea. Since there's such a short question, there's really only one big idea that is oftentimes hit on those. Oops, I'm sorry, I clicked too soon. All right, so this would be, again, on the AP Central website, and this is the Q&A that's put together by the chief reader about the student performance. So you can see here, right, what's been circled is what was sort of the intent of the question. And it'll give you some specifics about how the students were supposed to prove their understanding of chemistry on this particular question. You'll then see as you kind of read through that area some of the things that students did that were common errors. So you'll see, right, that they always start with the intent of the question, and then it continues on with how did the students do, what were some of the areas that they had issues with, and maybe what are some advice pieces for the teachers. So in addition to using the IPR, I look at these and go through and say to myself, man, was I actually phrasing it wrong? And so for years, I was incorrectly phrasing certain things, and then reading through, I was like, oh, that makes so much more sense. So it clarifies some of those details for you as a teacher as well. So you would then use that IPR to sort of decide what questions you really want to focus on. And then you would look at these Q&A, and now you can see, right, as I've turned the page, that it's very spelt out as to what some of the errors in fact were. And so you can see here as well, right, that it's not even just going to be generally about question one, it's actually going to be about each of the different parts in question one. And again, it will continue on, and that's going to continue to tell you some of the things that you as a teacher might want to improve on as well. So again, these are all things that you can find on the College Board website. And Todd, you've typed in that reading the report helped you also dig into the appropriate depth, and I agree. Especially with the change curriculum and therefore with the curriculum framework, the questions are not cut and dry like they used to be. It used to have that sort of feel like if you just asked them an empirical formula, all the kid had to do was calculate the empirical formula, and show some math. And now it is going much further into depth. And so this, again, helps direct you as to what kinds of activities you want to use. Again, with the AP Insight program, those free response questions that are used as the assessments at the end of those challenge areas also give you some great depth of question for you to practice with. So here would be, right, after you sort of identified areas that you would want to work with, now you would go in and say, all right, I feel like I'd like to work on my students and how they're doing with thermochemistry. And at that point, you might go straight into the challenge area and start to look for certain things. So this is the challenge area on representing and modeling energy. And again, you might want to just go in and just kind of double check the student strategies and the student struggles. So what areas are students typically struggling on? And think to yourself, are those the same areas that I think my own students are struggling on? And so that would be a good place to just kind of start. Like if those are things that, are being suggested by AP Insight and the designers as far as areas that students over all of the years that AP has been presented are still having struggles with over all these years, then it might be true that your students are as well. So that's always a great way to do it. Let's see. So Maria, I will have to look specifically as to where that is. It is in there, and I know that I've seen it a couple of times now, so I will have to find that website for you, I think. If anybody else happens to know where that is, that would be helpful as well, because I know that 2016 is in there somewhere. The other thing that you might want to just double check on are the sequence recommendations. And again, that's also in figuring out, how you want to teach the challenge area. For me, the student struggles would be a little bit more important. All right. So once you've kind of gotten an idea of things that you want to fix or things that you'd like to change about how you're presenting the material or activities you're doing with your students, I almost always go back to the student progress sheet that's in the AP Insight program. And really the reason for that for me is that those statements that they make on each of these pieces, covering the challenge areas, are just such quick, easy ways of having the students just check themselves. So even before, you have given a test or before the AP exam itself, it's just a quick way for them to make sure that they know what they're doing. And then for you to be able to decide, yep, they're doing okay, let's go ahead and move on from there. Admittedly, I don't use the student progress sheet as the sheet. So sort of tricks to the trade, right, is that sometimes I just print it off and then show them just one of them and have them just consider that one statement as to whether they agree or disagree. And I do that because, as you're teaching, you sometimes just want quick checks and you don't actually want to give them entire pages to check. You want to just see if they know that one concept. So sometimes I break this sheet up. All right, so it looks like Audra is offering a page for the Q&A that might work. So Maria, if you want to try that page, that might be helpful for you. All right. So keep in mind, when I first started teaching the AP, I really, with the program, was constantly like jumping the gun. There would be a content area that I knew was going to be challenging, and so I'd rush through all of the early stuff and then suddenly figure out like, oh, they didn't even understand all of those preliminary pieces of information. Again, if you find that you have an area that you want to focus on, and take another look at the building blocks that are being used to sort of scaffold that challenge area. So again, this is another great location where if you're thinking to yourself, you know, I really just want to double check that my students have it. I've even taken the different tasks that are in the performance tasks of the building blocks and given them out individually to just kind of double check that things are going okay. So even to just cut those apart a little bit. And let's see. So Todd, you're asking, that is laid out in the AP Insight, right? So you can see all the different building blocks, and the tasks are really lined up so that you're doing the easiest task first and then kind of building from there. I'm just going to flip backwards here for a second. It does follow then that sequence recommendation that you can find when you go into the sort of prepare area of AP Insight. So again, if you're looking for a way just to, you know, check how your students are doing, those are some great places. Yeah, so I know you're still typing, Maria, but so the way that I use this student progress report, or excuse me, student progress sheet, is that I have the students maybe just do one statement at a time. Exactly. And then when they're doing that one statement, I try to pick the one that goes along with either the lesson I just did or the lesson that even maybe we're about to do, so that it's really targeting the one area that I want them to sort of focus on that is clearly going to be a misunderstanding that students have shown before that they have issues with. So I do that, you know, you could do it as, you know, some teachers call them bell ringers. You could do it right before class. You could do it as an exit slip, right, where you have them do it after class. You could do it as one quiz question, you know, as part of a whole of a quiz. I've even done it where they just have to discuss as a group and try to figure out if they can find the answer for it. And sometimes, I mean, they're so caught up in their understanding of the concept that some of the students will actually start arguing with each other as to whether they should be agreeing or disagreeing. And that's great because the more that they're discussing the concepts, the better they're going to be at remembering those concepts as well. You know, I have, Todd, given them the list at the end. Oftentimes it's embedded in all of the different handouts that they have, so sometimes I'll highlight them at the end. I don't always give them like all of the statements in one sheet, mainly because by then I feel like we've gotten through a lot of it. But you absolutely could. I think that would be a great idea. I don't know that I'd ever thought of it that way. So yeah, that would be a great idea as well, is to just give them the entire sheet at the end of the unit. All right, so again, look to those building blocks, look to those progress sheets, and then really take some time to see where those science practices are. And that's where, in terms of scoring the exams, I've really found that some of the kids are just struggling on science practices. So the more you can get your students to do like this little bit here, which is just comprehending what's going to occur with equilibrium or temperature changes or any sort of graphing opportunity, that is a perfect way to sort of help the students bridge that gap. And so that's, again, why I really like some of these building block performance tasks, because they really do hit those science practices. All right. So the quizzes, of course, if you've started to use the Insight program, and if you haven't and you're sort of new to it, those building block quizzes are also going to give you some pretty good information to really let those students know how they're doing on their own. And remember, you get all that great feedback afterwards, right? The student gets some tips to the trade, some extra information that's going to help them out. So really take those building blocks and use those quizzes to kind of give yourself an idea of how they're doing and give yourself an idea sort of ahead of the game before the students have even taken the AP exam, how you feel like you should maybe make some adjustments. So if you're finding that you've given one of these building block quizzes and the kids aren't doing well, then you know that that means the next day you need to take a moment and pause, or you need to, supplement with some additional information, or maybe just clear up, units, for example. So that might be, again, a just quick way for you to find out, for the students to find out how things are going. And so again, here's what your data now looks like. And for those of you who have used AP Insight before, it is a new format. And the format still provides for you the different colors, which is really great. It still helps you decide, very quickly, like how many students are doing well, how many students are really struggling, so that again, you as the teacher would be able to make some adjustments if you feel like that's something that needs to be worked on. Yeah, I agree. Todd's mentioning, right, that the planning report can really tie to the quizzes, and that's absolutely true, right? So you've got the planning, right, the instructional planning report that would tie to those quizzes. You've got the student progress sheet that's going to tie to the instructional planning report as well. Like, all of these are built like around each other. So Maria, I do these quizzes, I would say the reading load of the quiz is usually kind of high, but they're only 4 questions long and they're multiple choice. So I would not give them, maybe 90 seconds. And I oftentimes even send the quizzes home to the kids. And with the new design of the quiz platform, what you have the opportunity to do is sort of open it, and close it, right? So give the students access to try to take the quiz and then close it off. So what I want to know from the kids is, are they thinking through the questions? So for me, sending the quiz home for the student and letting them just sort of think through and spend some extra time thinking about the concepts is fine. If that therefore means that they're going to be talking to other students about the content, that's even better. So I actually send these quizzes home oftentimes, especially when they've got those high reading loads, just so that we can then get that data, figure out what areas are still struggling on, and then go from there. So right, I wouldn't necessarily just give them that sort of 90-second time frame. I would try to extend it a little bit. The free response questions that are part of the challenge area assessments, those I feel like are closer in terms of reading load to the actual AP exam, and therefore those I would stick with the time frame a little bit more closely. All right, so if you guys have seen, again, this as well with the quizzes and the information that you can get from it, you can clearly see that this student here that I'm pointing at has had some issues with all of the questions, right? All 4 of those little questions. And so that therefore would mean, maybe I need to have just a private conversation with that student. So again, it's going to help me direct what I need to do and how to utilize my time best. You can also see that this class as a whole, right, with question 2 and question 4, maybe all of the students didn't quite get the question, or maybe I need to just relook at, the content of that question and make sure that we hit that clearly. So again, this is another great way for you to just, again, utilize the data to figure out how you want to adjust your teaching. Okay, now the next steps guide, right, is kind of similar for each of the different challenge areas. And so as you're going through those, I always think it's good to just model to the kids the next things that you would do as a teacher, as well as the next things that they should therefore do as a teacher. So I know that as I'm planning through a lesson, I write notes to myself about things that worked really, really well. And if a student is getting straight answers, like every single answer on those quizzes is correct, they should be telling themselves what they're doing really, really well. So I don't let the students get away with, comments like, I'm awesome, or of course I knew that, because I really want those students to take a moment and say, I understood this part, I understood that part, I understood that part, so that the next time they go and they do it, they're still going to be able to do it. And the same is true for the students who missed all of the questions. Don't just tell me I need to study more, like tell me specifically what you're going to intend to study. So it's a really great way to just model to the students, like, here's what I would be working on, what are you going to be working on? And so again, just reflecting, thinking about changes that you could make, thinking about changes that they could make as well. All right. Once you kind of feel like you've hit all of those pieces, again, I would encourage you to just go back and look at that whole challenge area. Check to see that the performance task of the entirety of the challenge area, because remember there's a whole performance task just for that, whether or not you feel like you've hit all the different targets. And so if you feel like as you read through it, you've gotten through all of the different pieces, and you can see when you look at the performance task, it's going to line up all the different building blocks and what the students should know, and then go into the actual tasks themselves. So as you're thinking through that, if you know the students were maybe struggling on building block B, you might want to use this opportunity to double check, like, okay, do they have building block B now? And so this is the overall performance task of the challenge area is just really meant to make sure that the students aren't just getting each building block, but then also tying all of those building blocks together. So again, for those students who maybe were struggling on the thermochemistry that we saw on the IPR, this would be a great opportunity for you to check that, yes, things are now going well for those kids. And then again, assessing the understanding through your challenge area assessment is going to be great because now the students have to write about it. Yeah, Todd, I agree. Like the theme is everything is tied together these days, right? And again, that's part of the reason why we picked these challenge areas were because they were so foundational to everything else, right? So fundamental to comprehending the entirety of chemistry. So that is kind of the focus there for sure. All right. So this is one of the challenge area assessments, and again, it's a little blurry, but you would be able to find it if you just went into, looking at energy. And again, you can see that what they've done is they've really focused on that particular concept. So unlike the actual exam, you're going to see that this one is going to just focus on that one big idea. The exam itself will actually focus on multiple big ideas, but this one you're going to be able to really hit home and make sure that the students are feeling good. Now, I again use these in all kinds of different ways, whether you're using them for maybe an assessment, you're using them for a quiz, you're using them as an activity. And that's maybe one of my favorite parts is to just use it as an activity with the class, have them all write about what things they believe should be the answers, and then have them score each other and really, again, have those discussions. So for me, everything is about getting the kids to talk about the content. And the more they're doing the talking and the less I'm doing the talking, the more they're going to be able to remember everything. So that's really the goal there. And keep in mind, with this challenge area assessment, you have those great rubrics that you can print off too. So you can have the kids really sit down and judge each other to a certain extent. And I tell the kids to try to be a little harsh with each other the first time. And that's because I also know that doing the AP reading, you have, um, they take for granted sometimes how poor their English is when it comes to writing about science. And so the peer grading is so great for those students to really rip to shreds, like, which preposition were you supposed to be using? Was it the correct vocab word? Were you really intending calorimetry, or were you trying to say molar heat? So absolutely, I would definitely do that. Let's see. So Maria's asking for the quizzes after initially not showing the scores to students. Can you change the setting? Absolutely. So that is again in the I think I want to say manager classes, but that doesn't sound right to me. It's in the same button where it's right underneath. I can see it. It's right underneath the button that says you're gonna give students access to the quiz. Right below that, you can click that on because there's a second button that allows the students to actually see the scores. So absolutely, Maria, have them look at those scores, have them check the correct answer, and then again, for each of those students, it's going to give them direct feedback about what they're doing. So yeah, so those are just some different tips, right? And if all is going well, then the next time you get to your IPR after the students have taken this next year's exam, right, in May of 2017, you'll be even better about, knowing what things were really working and what things weren't working as well. So you can always adjust from year to year. And so, right, those would be then some things, right, to just modify. Like, again, double check yourself, figure out, are you hitting all of the different key concepts? Figure out if the students are hitting all the key concepts. And then from there, be able to make adjustments as you go for each of your different units, especially if you find a strategy worked really well for one unit. That same strategy may help the kids with another unit as well. So, again, those are just some tips about kind of getting through how the IPR gets you started, and then using the AP Insight program to help you sort of push forward with some changes in your class. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to kind of open it to you guys, taking the opportunity to maybe ask questions. I actually have a slide that says ask questions, but what I'd love for you to do is to take a moment. This link down here should be the same link that gets you to your instructional planning report. And so you could sign in just as yourself and see if you can get it downloaded. And if you haven't done this before, you're not actually sure like how to find it, that's the link that you would use. So you might even want to save it rather than, I know some of you had suggested that you're actually getting them from your vice principal or you're getting them from your school. This is a nice, quick, easy way of just getting it for yourself because it is always released 1 week after you receive your student scores. So that kind of gives you a time frame rather than waiting for the school year to start and then getting it then. You know, yeah, Todd, I think that they delete them off the site every year. I have mine from, gosh, years back, but I print mine every year and just keep them in a file. Um, So yeah, I that's a really great question. I wonder, I assume that they have them stored somewhere. I wonder if there's a way to get access to them. All right. So hopefully you're all clicking on that. And if you're running into any problems, please let me know. If you can't open your instructional planning report, then I can send College Board just a question about how to get it. Yeah, Stephen, that's a great question as well. I will let me put out a feeler to see how that would go and whether or not you can actually get those. Because it would be nice to be able to see, previous years. Sorry, typing and talking is not going well for me, but previous years IPR so that you can make those comparisons. And Maria is offering a suggestion that if you haven't tried that of changing the year, I feel like I remember doing that at some point. Yeah, that's right. Under the exam year in that upper right corner. Yes, you should be able to find those. Thank you. Great tips. So you do want to just check, right? Make sure that you can download it. Kind of look to see how yours went. And then one thing would be, right, if there was something that you do with instructional planning, you might even want to share that. So again, the discussion board for AP Insight is always open for you to share anything that you think might be helpful, or even ask other people some questions about what you should do. So if you're really struggling with a particular content area, or you're looking at, even just one of the performance tasks and you're thinking, I'm not sure if I should do it in groups, or I'm not sure if I should have the students do it individually, use that Share What Works link, which is the discussion board for AP Insight, and just go ahead and ask, right? There's a lot of great people who have been on there, who have been sharing information and asking each other questions, even sharing things to do after the exam. When it's not even involving AP Insight anymore, there's been some suggestions there too. So it is a really nice forum for you to sort of just talk to each other. We have then, right, some time if you'd like. I know that we've just sort of wrapped up with the hour that we planned out. If for any reason you would like to just kind of stay, ask questions, do make sure that if you wanted to get the handouts that were below, make sure that you grab those before you leave and just download those. Those are allowed for you to just kind of look at one more time. There are some links you should be able to see as well for AP Insight help, all of that sort of thing. So let me just turn the page here. I'm going to ask you guys to do two things, and I'm just double checking that that's the right, yeah, that's the correct website. I'm going to ask you to do the survey, and before you leave, if you need this information as well, I'm going to put this up again. So that's the contact information for AP Insight directly in case you're running into any problems, or in case you're not quite sure where to find the materials and you didn't get a chance to grab those. So if you can, before you go, do fill out this survey, and it should be a link that you can just click directly on. And that'll just give us some feedback, one, about me, how things went, and then two, about other questions that you might have, whether it's with respect to IPR, AP Insight, other PLCs that you'd like to be involved in or have information about. Please make sure that you fill that out, because that's always super helpful for us as a team. And I am going to then just stay on the line as well. So if you're looking at your own IPR and want to ask questions about how you maybe should interpret something, or if you're interpreting it correctly, by all means, please feel free to stay and just type in the chat box. Yeah, Lynn, the links should be all the way down at the bottom. I wonder if yours looks different than mine. Right, it should be completely below this screen under, it's called like reading materials, if you can see that little window. And then if you scroll down, you should be able to grab those off of it. Lynn, let me know if you find those. Okay, so it says unsupported content on it? Huh, that's unusual. So below, right, so below that, do you see a button that says download files, perchance? Hmm. Stephen, that is a totally different question. Let me see. Huh, interesting. Let's see. Okay, well, Stephen, let's go with, right, there are apparently no labels at the top. So let's go with strongly agree on the right. Yep. And strongly disagree on the left. And we'll just make that our go-to right now. So Lynn, are you referring to the this Adobe Connect that we're on right now? Yeah, Todd, sometimes the report processing for the IPR or even for your students' reports goes kind of slowly. So, or if multiple people are on at the same time, it also goes sort of slowly. So that might be part of the reason why, right? So if you do reload, sometimes it clicks back in and picks the report back up. And again, as you guys are looking at your IPRs, if you're able to get a hold of them and you do have questions, do let me know. Yeah, Lynn, part of the problem with the iPad, and let me think if I'm saying this correctly because I'm not necessarily the greatest at technology. The downloading materials, they're PDFs, and so sometimes they don't load on the iPad well. But if you wanted me to email them to you, I could, if that was something that you'd be interested in. Maria, you're totally welcome. I mean, if that's helpful at all, let me know how it goes. I mean, hopefully, you'll come back on one of these PLCs and I'll be either in the room or chatting. But yeah, I mean, I love when the kids are talking about the concepts, and the more they're talking to each other, and also the more they're talking to other people about the concepts, I feel like the better they are at comprehending like what's actually occurring. So Lynn, no problem. I can go ahead and do that right now um, while you're sitting there. Yeah, Maria, that's a great idea as well. I hadn't even thought about that because I also use Google Classroom, so that might be kind of a nice way to just kind of give students a means of blogging, even, which I've taken classes online before where I've had to blog. I've never thought about doing it that way in my own class, but that's a great idea as well. All right, and Lynn, I'm sending you those documents right now. Thanks, Ron. Have a great night. Thanks, Stephen. You have a great night too.
Nice job.
Okay. I know.